At Hollow Creek High, power belongs to the privileged, and the safest way to survive is to stay invisible. But when the school's untouchable bully targets two black siblings, thinking they'll be easy to break, the game changes. The older sister refuses to back down, not just with her fists, but with confidence, composure, and the strength of a community behind her. Can she take on the system itself, or will she be silenced like so many before her? Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and let me know what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has spread. And don't forget to hit subscribe to catch more powerful stories every day. Now, let's get into it. Oak Ridge, Texas, was a town baked hard by the sun and bound tight by old grudges, where the wind carried secrets and the dust never truly settled. Hollow Creek High sat at its center, a squat brick building heavy with the weight of unspoken rules. Here, power didn't belong to the smartest or the strongest. It belonged to the right last names, the right smirk that said, "I dare you to challenge me." Everyone else, they learned to stay small, to move quiet, to survive. Leela Hayes knew that better than most. At 16, she had perfected the art of invisibility, footsteps light against scuffed linoleum, gaze lowered just enough to avoid trouble, voice kept measured, controlled. She wasn't the loud one, wasn't the reckless one. She didn't need to be. The air in Hollow Creek High was thick with heat and tension, a place where standing out was just another way to get knocked down. Her mother had taught her the rule early. The less they see you, baby, the safer you are. It was a lesson carved into her bones, one she had lived by without question. But rules don't always hold when the ground starts shifting beneath your feet, and in Hollow Creek, the ground was always shifting. Waiting for someone to slip, or someone to finally push back. Leela Hayes grew up tugged between two voices, two truths pulling tight like ropes around her wrists. Her mother's words were a lullaby of survival murmured over the steady hum of a sewing machine late at night. The less they see you, baby, the safer you'll be. A simple rule worn smooth by years of practice. Keep your head down, keep quiet, move like a shadow through Oak Ridge, a town where eyes lingered too long and whispers cut like knives. Leela carried that lesson like armor, her silence a shield, her presence a ghost. But then there was Ruby Jackson. Her grandmother's voice didn't whisper, it cracked like thunder over the Texas plains. "Don't let nobody step on you without paying a price," she'd say. Arms crossed, eyes sharp as flint. Ruby wasn't just tough. She was a woman who had thrown men twice her size to the ground and walked away laughing. She didn't believe in shrinking and hiding. She believed in standing, in striking, in making sure the world knew your name. Leela had learned both lessons well. Her fists knew how to stay still, how to wait. But her bones knew fire, a strength coiled tight beneath her skin, restless and waiting. She never asked for it, never wanted it, but it was there, humming low in her chest, a storm just beneath the surface. Two paths, two voices, one whispering caution, one demanding fire. And Leela didn't know which one would win when the time came. At Hollow Creek High, Bryce Dalton didn't just walk, he loomed. Every step was a stake in the dirt, every glance a warning. He carried his father's name like a crown, heavy with power, polished by fear. As the mayor's son, he wasn't just another high school tyrant. He was untouchable, his reputation an unspoken rule no one dared to break. Bryce wasn't loud or reckless like some bullies. He was precise, deliberate, a storm that never struck the same way twice. One day, a cutting remark in the hallway, soft enough to seem harmless but sharp enough to stick. The next, a well-placed shove, a tray tipped in the cafeteria, a book kicked down the stairs. He didn't have to throw the first punch. He made sure someone else did, and he made sure they lost. Jake, Cole, and Travis followed in his wake, loyal like dogs but twice as eager to bite. They weren't as sharp, weren't as dangerous, but they didn't need to be. Bryce pointed, they laughed, he smirked, they struck. Together they ruled the halls, a pack that hunted the weak, the quiet, the ones who hadn't yet learned how to disappear. Leela had learned. She had spent years dodging Bryce, slipping around his presence like stepping over a rattlesnake sunning itself on the pavement. She had seen what happened to the ones who didn't. Bruises hidden beneath sleeves, voices dimmed to whispers. Bryce didn't just crave power, he thrived on fear, feeding off every flinch, every glance turned quickly away. His strength wasn't just in his fists, but in the town itself. The way teachers hesitated, the way complaints died in throats before they could be spoken. Lila had built walls, stayed quiet, stayed small, but storms don't wait at the edges forever. And Bryce Dalton had a way of finding the cracks. Milo Hayes was 13, long limbs, quick feet, and a laugh too big for a town as small as Hollow Creek. He hadn't learned to shrink yet, hadn't figured out that some places didn't have room for kids like him. His voice rang out in the halls, clear and careless, cutting through the low hum of routine like a song in a silent room. He didn't notice the way heads turned, the way glances sharpened, measuring him, weighing him. To Milo, Hollow Creek High was just another place to explore, to run, to be. To Lila, it was a hunting ground. She'd spent years keeping him close, her fingers tight around his wrist, her voice low but firm. "Stay small, Milo. Stay safe." But he never listened, never saw the edges of the world the way she did. His laughter was a spark in a field of dry grass, and Lila knew what happened to sparks. Now, she watched him harder, her stomach knotting every time he bounded ahead on the way home, his backpack bouncing, his grin untamed. She could shield him from the little things, the whispers, the stray elbows in crowded halls. But Bryce Dalton wasn't little. He was a shadow stretching long, a wolf catching the scent of something easy to break. Milo didn't see it, but Lila did. And the storm was already rolling in. Ruby Jackson wasn't just Lila's grandmother. She was a force of nature, a woman forged in dust and determination. In her youth, she had thrown men twice her size to the ground, her name whispered with a mix of awe and warning in the old Texas fight circuits. Her hands, calloused and scarred, were maps of every battle she'd won, every lesson she'd learned. And from the moment Lila could stand without wobbling, Ruby had her in the backyard, teaching her the language of survival. "Strength ain't about swinging first," Ruby would say, her voice steady as the wind through the mesquites. "It's about knowing when to strike and when to walk away." Lila spent hours on the cracked dirt, shadow boxing under the relentless sun, her feet quick, her breath sharp. Ruby made her dodge imaginary blows, her hands moving with the precision of a blade unsheathed. "Faster," she'd bark, tapping her own temple. "Don't think, feel." Lila learned to read a fight before it started, to measure distance, to strike with speed, not anger. Every movement became second nature, a quiet power settling into her bones. But Ruby's lessons were never just about fists. "This ain't for starting trouble," she warned, her sharp gaze locking onto Lila's. "It's for when trouble won't give you a choice." Lila listened, nodded, and deep down she believed she'd never need it. Fighting was for the ring, for the stories Ruby told late at night. But Hollow Creek didn't care about beliefs. It cared about power, and in a town like this, weakness wasn't an option. Trouble in Oak Ridge always started small, a pebble rolling downhill before anyone noticed the avalanche. Bryce Dalton had noticed Milo. He caught the way the kid bounced through the halls, laughed too easily, didn't shrink like the others. That made him interesting, that made him prey. One afternoon, Lila saw it happen. A quick jab of words, Bryce leaning in, voice a low hiss. "What's so funny, little man?" Milo froze, grin faltering, but didn't answer. Bryce smirked, sharp as a blade, and his pack Jake Cole Travis snickered behind him like a chorus of hyenas. Lila watched from the edge of the crowd, stomach twisting, but didn't move, not yet. Afterward, she caught Milo's arm, pulling him toward the exit. "Ignore it," she murmured. "They want you to snap." "Don't." He nodded, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched just a little more than before. Bryce wasn't done, she knew that. He'd tasted something in Milo, something soft, something breakable, and Hollow Creek was his hunting ground. The next time it wasn't just words. Lila was late leaving class when she heard Milo's voice, sharp, startled, echo from the courtyard. She rounded the corner and saw Bryce looming over him, one hand shoving Milo's chest, sending him stumbling. Jake laughed, short and ugly. Cole kicked at Milo's spilled backpack. Milo scrambled up, red-faced, fist balled, but he didn't swing, just stood there, breathing hard. Bryce grinned. "What's wrong? Gonna cry?" Lila moved before she could think, but stopped herself 10 steps away. Her fists ached to speak, but she forced them still. Her mother's voice, whispering through the haze. "Stay safe, baby. Stay small." She unclenched her jaw, made her voice flat. "Milo, let's go." Bryce glanced at her, amused, but didn't push further. Not yet. Milo grabbed his bag and followed, head down. Lila swallowed the fire in her chest. She couldn't afford to burn. But Bryce's smirk followed them, a promise carved in the air. She knew ignoring him wouldn't work forever. Bryce didn't let up. What started as shoves turned uglier. A game, played slow, patient. In the cafeteria, he knocked Milo's tray to the floor. Water splashed across his sneakers. Cole blocked the way out. Travis laughed. "Oops," Bryce drawled. "Guess you're clumsy today." Milo stood there, jaw tight, trying to laugh it off, but Lila saw the tension in his neck, the way his hands shook as he picked up the mess. Then came the notebook. Pages of Milo's sketches, torn out, crumpled in the hallway, Bryce's boot grinding them into the dirt. "Kid's an artist, huh?" he sneered. His pack howled. Lila found Milo after, sitting on the curb, face blank but eyes too bright. "I'm fine," he muttered. His voice cracked. She walked him home, faster now, her shadow stretching long beside his, her silence heavier than the Texas heat. Bryce wasn't just testing Milo, he was testing her, and she felt it building, a pressure behind her ribs, a storm she couldn't keep locked away. It came to a head on a Wednesday. The sun sank low, painting the Hollow Creek basketball court in rust and gold. Lila was halfway home when she heard it. Milo's voice, not laughing now, angry, edged with fear. She dropped her bag and ran. Rounding the corner, she saw Milo, back against the chain-link fence, books scattered like fallen leaves. Bryce towered over him, grinning wide and wicked, one hand shoving Milo hard enough to rattle the metal. Jake and Cole circled loose, laughing sharp. Travis leaned against the hoop, watching like it was a show. "Say it," Bryce taunted. "Say you're nothing, and I'll let you go." Milo's chin lifted. "Screw you." Bryce laughed, dark and low, and shoved him again. Lila was there before she could think, crossing the court in seconds, breath sharp in her throat. She stepped between them, her body a wall. Bryce tilted his head, amused. "What's this? Big sis playing hero?" Milo scrambled up behind her, breathing fast but standing tall. Lila didn't speak, didn't flinch. The court went quiet, the air thick as dust, and the storm inside her stirred, restless and ready. Bryce didn't back off, he never did. He stepped closer, invading Lila's space, breath hot with arrogance. "You gonna do something, Hayes?" he sneered. Then he shoved her, hard. She stumbled a step, caught herself, and something snapped. Ruby's voice cut through the haze. "Strength waits, but it strikes." Bryce swung, wild, sloppy with overconfidence. Lila moved, sidestep smooth as water. His punch hit air. Her counter landed sharp and fast, a jab to his ribs, cracking like thunder. Bryce gasped, doubling over, his smirk gone, replaced by shock. Jake and Cole froze, laughter dying in their throats. Travis straightened, eyes wide. Bryce staggered back, clutching his side, face red with fury and pain. Lila didn't chase him, just stood still, fists loose, watching. "Get up," she said, voice calm, cold. "He didn't." She turned, grabbed Milo's hand and pulled him toward the street, her pulse hammering but her steps steady. Behind her, Bryce's ragged breaths echoed. His pack stayed silent. "This ain't over," he spat. It sounded weak, hollow. Lila didn't look back. She knew it wasn't over, not yet. But Bryce had no idea what he'd just woken up. By morning, Hollow Creek High buzzed with whispers, sharp and slicing, weaving through the halls like a blade through dry grass. Leela felt the weight of the stairs before she saw the summons. A crisp note slipped under her locker, inked with an order. Principal's office. Now. She knew what it meant before she even walked in. Bryce was already there, sprawled in a chair, a dark bruise blooming under his shirt, his expression carefully crafted into something pitiful. Principal Hargrove stood stiff behind his desk, but it was Mayor Dalton who dominated the room, broad-shouldered, cold-eyed, voice a low growl. "You think you can lay hands on my boy and walk away?" It wasn't a question. Bryce's lies slithered through the air, twisting truth into shadows. He claimed Lila had jumped him unprovoked, a thug picking a fight. Hargrove shifted uncomfortably but didn't contradict him. Lila squared her shoulders, jaw locked. "He shoved me first, hit me first." Dalton chuckled, a sound like gravel under tires. "That's not what I hear, girl." The air thickened, charged with a power she couldn't touch. Bryce sat smug, knowing the game was rigged. Hargrove cleared his throat. "We're looking into it." Dalton cut him off. "No need, she's trouble." Lila's fists clenched at her sides. Ruby's lessons echoed in her head, but she swallowed them down. This wasn't a fight she could win with fists. Not here, not now. The tide had turned against her. The meeting stretched on, the clock ticking like a slow heartbeat in the heavy silence. Mayor Dalton leaned against the wall, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent hum. More crown than authority. "My boy's got marks," he said, slow and deliberate, "and you expect me to believe he started it?" Lila met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "He did." Hargrove fidgeted, shuffling papers like they held answers, but Dalton's stare pinned her down. "You're lucky I don't press charges," he said, his voice all polished steel. "Assault's a serious word around here." His badge was a justice. It was a hammer poised above her future. Hargrove finally spoke, voice thin. "Lila, we're suspending you, indefinitely, until we sort this out." She let out a sharp laugh, bitter. "And Bryce?" Dalton's smirk widened. "He'll be dealt with, internally." Which meant nothing, and they all knew it. Leela's stomach twisted, but her face stayed stone. This wasn't justice, it was a cage, meant to keep her in her place. "Go home," Hargrove muttered, eyes fixed on his desk. "We'll call when it's decided." Leela turned, her boots echoing against the tile, each step a drumbeat of anger she couldn't unleash. Dalton's voice followed her out the door. "Think twice next time, Hayes." She didn't answer, didn't look back. The system wasn't broken, it was built this way, and Bryce was its golden boy. But Lila wasn't done. They thought they'd silenced her. They were wrong. Lila stormed home, the Texas sun pressing down like a hammer. The house was empty, Milo at school, Mom still at the diner, so she headed straight to the garage. Ruby had turned it into a makeshift ring years ago. A punching bag, cracked mats, the lingering scent of sweat and dust. Lila dropped her bag, shrugged off her jacket, and started swinging, hard, fast. Her fists crashed against the leather, each hit a scream she couldn't voice, her knuckles burning against the worn surface. She saw Bryce's smirk, Dalton's cold stare, Hargrove's cowardice. Every punch carried their faces, every strike a wish to erase them. She hit until her muscles ached, her breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat dripping onto the concrete. Then a shadow fell across the bag. Ruby stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're mad," she observed, simple, no judgment. Lila stopped, chest heaving, staring at the floor. "They suspended me. Bryce gets nothing." Ruby didn't blink. "Smart don't always feel right, does it?" Lila shook her head. The words settled deep. She'd played it safe, kept her head down. And still they'd crushed her. The bag swayed, mocking her silence. Ruby stepped closer, voice low. "You ain't wrong for hitting back, girl. You're wrong for stopping there." Lila looked up, caught off guard. And for the first time since that office, her fire didn't feel like rage, it felt like purpose. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence thick, broken only by the slow creak of Ruby's chair as she leaned back. Lila traced the rim of her water glass, mind churning through the day, the office, the lies, the weight of it all. Ruby watched her, eyes sharp as flint. "You gonna tell me what's eaten you or just keep swinging at ghosts?" Lila exhaled sharply. "They're protecting him, Granny. I hit back once, and I'm the one out." Ruby nodded, slow, like she'd heard it all before. "That's how it goes in towns like this. Power picks its winners." Lila's fingers curled into a fist. "So I just take it?" Ruby's gaze hardened. "No, but you gotta be smart about the next swing." She let the words settle, then leaned in. "What happens when everyone he's hurt stops being scared?" Lila blinked. The question settled deep, heavy. She'd been focused on Milo, on herself, but the whispers in the halls, the kids who flinched at Bryce's name, they weren't just hers to carry. Ruby's words planted something in the ashes of Lila's anger, something sharp, something alive. "He ain't invincible," Ruby murmured, tapping the table. "He just thinks he is." Lila swallowed hard. The fire inside her shifted. Lila didn't sleep that night. She sat on the porch, Texas dark pressing in, stars dim behind the haze of Oak Ridge. Her suspension letter lay crumpled beside her, a weight she couldn't shake. But Ruby's words echoed louder. What happens when they stop being scared? She thought about Hollow Creek High, the kids who had nodded at her after the fight, their eyes speaking what their mouths couldn't. They'd seen her stand up, seen Bryce falter even just for a second. She wasn't a spark anymore. She was the fire. Bryce had hurt more than just Milo, more than just her, and she'd been too busy hiding to see it. Not anymore. Lila stood, her boots scraping against the porch, her shadow stretching long in the moonlight. Bryce thought he'd won, thought he'd buried her, but she was still here, still standing, and this time she wouldn't stand alone. The next morning, Lila flipped through an old notebook, her fingers tracing over faded numbers until she found Sam Torres. 2 years ago, he had been one of Bryce's victims. A skinny, quiet kid who took a broken arm and a school transfer just to escape. She dialed, heart hammering, the line crackling before a wary voice came through. "Hayes?" Lila didn't waste time. "I need your help. It's about Bryce." A long silence stretched between them, thick as the Texas heat. Then, finally, a slow exhale. "I'm listening." She told him everything. Milo, the school hearing, her suspension. Her words were sharp, cutting through the static. Another pause, then Sam spoke, his voice quieter this time, edged with something raw. "He got me outside the gym, said I looked at him wrong, no one did a damn thing." His voice was a cracked door, letting in the smallest sliver of hope. Lila tightened her grip on the phone. "They're doing it again, to me, to my brother. But this time, I have proof." A beat of silence. Then Sam's tone shifted, steadier, firmer. "What do you need?" Lila swallowed, feeling the seed Ruby had planted taking root. "You weren't the only one. I want to find the others." This time there was no hesitation. "I know a few names. I'll call you back." The line went dead with a soft click, but Lila felt it, a thread pulling tight. Bryce thought he had buried her. He didn't realize she was just getting started. By noon, Lila had names scrawled across a torn page. Sam's names, names she remembered from whispers in the halls of Hollow Creek High. Tara Nguyen left town after Bryce trashed her locker. Eli Brooks took a busted lip for talking back. Casey Dunn vanished mid-year, rumors swirling behind her. Each name wasn't just a victim, it was a brick in the wall against Bryce. She called Tara first. Her voice was steady, even as a knot tightened in her chest. "It's Lila Hayes. You remember Bryce?" A bitter laugh crackled through the line. "How could I forget? He made my life hell until I ran." Lila clenched her jaw. "He's still doing it. I fought back and now I'm suspended, but I have proof." "A recording?" Silence. Then Tara's voice, sharp and certain. "I'm in." Eli was next, hesitant at first, but his anger flared when she mentioned Milo. Bastard knocked my tooth out once. Count me in. Casey was harder to convince. Her voice was quiet, uncertain, but when Lila played the recording, she didn't hesitate. By sundown, the list had doubled. 8 names, 8 scars, 8 reasons to fight. Lila sat back, staring at the page, pulse quickening. These weren't just victims anymore. They were a reckoning, a chorus of voices Bryce had tried to silence. She wasn't asking them to throw punches, she was asking them to stand. And they said yes. The wall was rising. Bryce wouldn't see it coming. They met behind the old supermarket at dusk, Oak Ridge wrapped in a thick blanket of cicadas and lingering heat. Leela stood in the center, Sam, Tara, Eli, Casey, and the others forming a loose circle around her. Faces she'd once passed in the halls, now sharpened with purpose. Some looked angry, some looked afraid, but in their eyes storms gathered, ready to break. She took a breath and spoke, her voice cutting through the night. We all know how this goes. Bryce runs Hollow Creek like he owns it because his daddy cleans up his mess. Every time we let it slide, every time we don't fight back, he wins. But not this time. Tara crossed her arms, skeptical. He's untouchable, Lila. You're already out. What's this gonna do? Lila met her gaze, unwavering. He's untouchable until he's not. If we do nothing, I'm just the start. Eli nodded, slow and grim. He'll keep coming. He always does. Casey shifted, voice soft but firm. I'm tired of running. A ripple of agreement spread through the group. Lila held up her phone, the recording gleaming in the dim light. We have this. His voice, his threats, his fists. We take it public. Sam cracked a grin, small but real. He's done if this gets out. Lila nodded, the weight on her shoulders shifting, spreading across them all. We're not here to fight. We're here to make them listen. The circle tightened, a silent pact, a storm waiting to break. Lila pulled the group closer, their huddle tight beneath the supermarket's flickering light. She tapped her phone screen, the glow casting sharp angles across their faces, and pressed play. The recording crackled to life. Bryce's voice rang out, smug and dripping with cruelty. Say you're nothing, and I'll let you go. Then Milo's defiance, unwavering, screw you. A shove. A dull thud. Bryce's laugh, sharp as a blade slicing through the silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The audio rolled on. You gonna do something, Hayes? A scuffle. A strike. A sharp inhale of pain. Lila stopped the recording, letting the silence sink in. When she spoke, her voice was steady, unshaken. This is what he did. She held up the phone. And this is what we have. Tara's eyes narrowed, her voice edged with fire. That's him, no denying it. Eli clenched his fists, nodding. He's done for. Sam leaned in, staring at the phone like it held the weight of justice itself. How do you get this? Lila shrugged, the faintest smirk ghosting her lips. Milo's friend was there, hiding, sent it to me after. Casey exhaled, shaky but firm. They can't ignore this. Lila nodded. They won't. Her grip tightened around the phone, fingers curling around its edges like a weapon. His voice on tape is a noose. He tied it himself. The group exchanged glances. The hesitation was gone. Something stronger had taken its place. Certainty. Tara cracked her knuckles. We hit them with this at the board meeting. All of us. Layla slipped the phone into her pocket, her grip still tight. Every story, every bruise. We lay it all out. He doesn't walk away from this. The plan was set. The storm was ready to break. For the next hour they planned. Where, when, how. The school board meeting was in 2 days, a public session in Hollow Creek High's gym, the perfect stage. Lila paced, boots scuffing against the dirt, laying out each move like Ruby had taught her. Precise, deliberate. We go in together, she said, her voice like sharpened steel. Everyone speaks. Your stories, your proof. Then I play the tape. Sam nodded, arms crossed. I'll start. Make it clear it's not just you. Tara smirked, fire in her eyes. I've got pictures, my locker after he trashed it. Eli rolled his neck until it cracked. I'll tell them about the tooth, make it stick. Casey hesitated, then squared her shoulders. I'll talk. I'm done hiding. Leela looked at each of them, meeting their gazes one by one. Fear still flickered in their eyes, but something else burned brighter. Resolve. We don't just fight, she said, her voice firm. We win. They've ignored us for too long. A low murmur of agreement rippled through them, a quiet storm gathering strength. Leela held up a hand. Bryce will fight back, his dad too. They'll lie, twist things, but we have something they don't. The truth and numbers. Sam clapped a hand on her shoulder, solid and sure. They can't bury all of us. Leela nodded. The weight of it settled on her shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt strong. As night fell, they scattered, slipping back into their lives. But they weren't the same anymore. Not scared. Not silent. 2 days until the reckoning, and this time Bryce Dalton would pay. The gym at Hollow Creek High was a furnace of bodies and whispers. The bleachers overflowed with students, parents, and teachers, all waiting for the moment when silence would shatter. The air pulsed with tension, thick as Texas heat, as the school board sat rigid behind a folding table, 5 unsmiling faces, none eager to be here. Lila stood near the back, her heartbeat a steady drum, flanked by Sam, Tara, Eli, and Casey. A wall of quiet defiance. At the front, Bryce lounged in his seat, smirking, his posture careless. Beside him, his father, Mayor Dalton, loomed like a storm cloud ready to break. Principal Hargrove tapped the mic, his voice thin and strained. We're here to discuss recent incidents. Our priority is ensuring a safe environment for all. Dalton cut in smoothly, his words polished, his tone practiced. Let's call it what it is. My son was attacked unprovoked by a troublemaker. We can't let this stand. Lila's fists curled at her sides, nails biting into her palms, but she held still, waiting. The crowd shifted, eyes flicking between her and Bryce, some curious, some doubtful, some openly hostile. In the third row, Ruby sat motionless, her gaze steady, unwavering. A rock in the chaos. Lila met her eyes and felt the strength in them. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every kid Bryce had crushed, every story that had been buried. The board murmured among themselves, nodding as Dalton spoke. Lila saw it. The game was already rigged. But she wasn't playing by their rules tonight. The storm had come, and this time it was hers to unleash. Dalton stepped forward, his voice booming through the gym, steady and commanding. A preacher delivering salvation to a congregation he believed was already his. My boy's a good kid, team captain, honor roll, a future bright as this town's sunrise. Then Lila Hayes shows up, swinging fists, stirring trouble. He spread his hands, sighing like a man burdened by injustice. She's been harassing us for weeks, spreading lies, dragging Bryce's name through the mud. I'm asking for justice. Expel her. Now. His words were oil, slick, suffocating, coating the room in a false narrative. Bryce nodded along, his bruise carefully concealed beneath his jacket, his smirk a quiet declaration of victory. The board leaned in. Hargrove jotted notes, his expression tight with agreement. A few parents clapped. Others whispered. The tide shifted in Dalton's favor. Lila felt the heat rise in her chest, her pulse hammering, but she held her ground. Beside her, Sam muttered, "He's full of it." Tara's jaw tightened, her glare slicing through the room. Ely cracked his knuckles, slow and deliberate. Casey gripped her armrest, pale but steady. Dalton's gaze swept the gym, landing on Lila, sharp and expectant. "You got anything to say, Hayes?" He expected silence. He expected her to fold. The room held its breath. Leela stepped forward, boots striking the polished wood, her shadow stretching long behind her. She didn't flinch. "Yeah," she said, her voice clear, even. "I do." Sam moved first, rising before Dalton could blink, his voice rough but strong. Bryce broke my arm 2 years ago, said I looked at him funny. Nobody cared. A ripple of whispers stirred through the crowd, restless, uncertain. Tara stood next, fierce and unshaken. He trashed my locker, called me names until I left. Where was justice then? Eli followed, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Busted my tooth for talking back. Guess that makes me trouble too. Casey stood last, her hands trembling but her voice steady. He cornered me, made me hate coming here. I ran. I'm done running. Their voices crashed through the silence like thunder, each confession another crack in the foundation. The crowd shifted. Parents frowned, students nodded. Some who had once laughed with Bryce now looked away. Lila stepped to the mic, phone in hand, her gaze locked on Dalton. You want the truth, she said, steady. Listen. She pressed play. Bryce's voice filled the gym, arrogant, cruel. Say you're nothing, and I'll let you go. Milo's defiance, the shove, the scuffle, the sharp gasp of pain. The recording ended. The gym erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a teacher muttering, "That's him." Dalton's face darkened. Bryce jolted upright, his chair screeching against the floor. "That's fake," he yelled, voice cracking. Lila turned, calm as stone. "You threw the first punch, we all heard it." The board froze, Hargrove's pen stilled. The air had shifted, the wall was crumbling. Bryce lurched forward, his face burning red, sweat beading at his brow. "She's lying. That tape, it's edited, it's nothing." His voice wavered, a cornered animal lashing out. Dalton grabbed his arm, hissing, "Sit down!" But it was too late. Parents leaned in, students whispered, teachers exchanged knowing glances. Lila stood firm, the phone still warm in her hand. He pushed Milo, swung at me. "That's the truth." Eli pointed to his chipped tooth. Casey met Bryce's gaze, unflinching. The board hesitated. Hargrove cleared his throat. "This changes things." Dalton slammed his fist against the table. "This is ridiculous. You're taking her word over my son's?" A teacher stood. "Mrs. Carter, math?" Her voice unwavering. "We're taking evidence." Another nodded. "The tape doesn't lie." Bryce's breath hitched. His fists trembled. His friends in the bleachers shrank back. Dalton whirled on Hargrove. "Do your job. Expel her." Hargrove straightened, slow, deliberate. "Bryce Dalton is suspended indefinitely, pending investigation." The gym exploded. Shouts, gasps, murmurs. Bryce shoved the table. "You can't!" Hargrove met his glare. "We just did." Lila exhaled, the fire inside her settling into something calmer. Bryce turned, rage twisting his face. "This ain't over, Hayes." Lila didn't blink. "It is for you." His smirk shattered, his power crumbling into dust. And the room saw it. Bryce Dalton was finished. Dalton yanked Bryce through the crowd, his shouts drowned beneath the uproar. Anger, relief, disbelief. They shoved past, heads low. The gym swallowed their exit. Lila exhaled, the weight lifting. Sam clapped her back, grinning. "We got him, Hayes." Tara laughed, sharp and free. "Bastard's done." Eli nodded. Casey smiled, small but real. Lila turned, finding Ruby in the fading chaos. Her grandmother gave a single nod. She had stood tall, a shadow turned to light, and she hadn't done it alone. The war wasn't over, but tonight they had won. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on more exciting stories every day. See you in the next one.